I don't know why we should listen to a backward, racist swamp dweller who's never understood what it means to struggle. Representative Maxine Waters' voice thundered through the hearing room, her finger jabbing accusingly towards Senator John Kennedy. The Financial Services Committee hearing had barely begun, and already Waters had abandoned all pretense of procedure, launching immediately into a personal attack that left the audience gasping. "Let me make something crystal clear to everyone here," Waters continued, her voice rising with each word. "This man sitting across from me is nothing but a caricature, a fake Southern gentleman act designed to hide his contempt for working people. The people of California deserve better than to be lectured by someone who represents everything wrong with politics today." The hearing room erupted in chaos. Waters supporters, strategically positioned throughout the gallery, cheered and applauded, while committee members exchanged shocked glances. Some Republicans began to protest, but Waters, wielding her chairwoman's gavel with authority, silenced them immediately. "I am speaking," she declared, banging the gavel 3 times, "and it's about time someone told the truth about Senator Kennedy." This was supposed to be a routine hearing on banking regulations, but Waters had orchestrated something entirely different, a public humiliation of a political opponent she had long despised. Her staff had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering clips, quotes, and carefully edited materials designed to make Kennedy look foolish. "Your fake Oxford degree doesn't fool me, Senator," Waters sneered, emphasizing the word senator with dripping contempt. "We all know it was bought and paid for by your corporate handlers. You may have fooled the people of Louisiana with your folksy routine, but this committee sees right through you." Kennedy sat quietly at his designated spot, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. His face betrayed nothing. No anger, no embarrassment, just the slight hint of a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. To those watching, he appeared either completely unfazed or totally blindsided. Most assumed the latter. A young aide whispered something in Waters' ear, and she nodded with satisfaction. "I'm being told our live stream already has 50,000 viewers. America is finally seeing the truth about John Kennedy." Waters had prepared for this moment meticulously. A large screen behind her flashed to life, displaying a PowerPoint presentation with Kennedy's face edited onto a cartoon character in overalls chewing on a piece of straw. The gallery erupted in laughter. "Don't let that swamp dweller fool you, folks," Waters proclaimed, gesturing to the screen. "This act has gone on long enough." She played a heavily edited video montage of Kennedy's past statements, cut and rearranged to make him sound foolish and contradictory. The clips jumped from one hearing to another, sentences spliced together to create meanings Kennedy had never intended. Her staff had worked overnight on the presentation, and they beamed proudly from behind her as the audience reacted with gasps and laughter. "Here he is defending billionaires while claiming to represent working people," Waters narrated as the clips rolled. "Here he is questioning an African-American nominee with that condescending tone he reserves for people of color." The video ended with a clip of Kennedy stumbling slightly over his words during a late-night Senate session, looped 3 times for maximum effect. The Democratic side of the committee dais erupted in laughter. "What's wrong, Senator?" Waters taunted as Kennedy continued to write calmly in his notepad. "Cat got your tongue? Or did you forget your script today? Maybe your handlers didn't prepare you for someone who isn't intimidated by your act." Kennedy adjusted his reading glasses, made another note, and took a sip of water. His complete calm seemed to irritate Waters even more. "Look at him, too afraid to respond," she exclaimed, pointing dramatically. "The great orator of Louisiana, suddenly mute when confronted with the truth?" She played another clip, this one doctored to make it appear Kennedy had made racist remarks during a committee hearing the previous year. The editing was subtle but effective, cutting away just before Kennedy had qualified his statement with context that completely changed its meaning. This is who the people of Louisiana chose to represent them. A man who can't even defend himself when his own words are played back to him? Several of Kennedy's Republican colleagues looked ready to intervene, but Kennedy himself made a small gesture with his hand, asking them to wait. He continued taking notes, seemingly unbothered by the onslaught. For nearly 20 minutes, Waters continued her barrage, breaking every rule of decorum, while her supporters live-streamed the takedown. The hashtag Kennedy Roasted was already trending on social media. Waters' digital team posted clips in real time celebrating what they saw as a definitive political assassination. Senator Kennedy represents everything wrong with the Republican Party, Waters continued, now pacing dramatically in front of the dais. The fake folksy manner hiding cruel policies, the pretend humility masking arrogance, the rehearsed one-liners designed to go viral while saying nothing of substance. She approached Kennedy's table, standing directly in front of him. Your routine might work back in Louisiana, Senator, but here in Washington, we need serious people who understand policy, not carnival barkers with clever catchphrases. A staffer handed Waters a tablet, which she held up triumphantly. The New York Times is already covering this hearing live. The headline reads, "Waters exposes Kennedy's facade." How does it feel to have your act finally revealed, Senator? Kennedy simply turned to a fresh page in his legal pad and continued writing. This studied nonchalance wasn't the reaction Waters had anticipated, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She recovered quickly, however, turning to address the packed room. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what privilege looks like. When confronted with his own words, with his own record, Senator Kennedy believes he can simply ignore the questions, that he's somehow above accountability. She leaned toward Kennedy, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that the microphone still captured perfectly. That might work with the good old boys back home, Senator, but not here. Not today. Finally, Waters delivered what she believed would be her coup de grace. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Senator? Or are you just going to hide behind your white privilege in that fake Southern drawl? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Kennedy. The moment stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for his response. With deliberate slowness, Kennedy set down his pen. He removed his reading glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them on the table. He stood up, straightened his slightly rumpled suit, and cleared his throat. "Chairwoman Waters," he began, his Louisiana accent measured and mild, "my mama taught me never to argue with someone who was putting on a show. But you've said so many inaccurate things, I feel I should clarify a few points." He opened a thick folder that had been sitting on the table in front of him. The folder was filled with color-coded tabs and meticulous documentation. Several of Waters' staffers exchanged nervous glances as Kennedy arranged his papers with unhurried precision. "You know, my grandpappy used to say that the louder someone yells, the less they usually have to say. I've been sitting here wondering why you're yelling so loud today, Chairwoman Waters, but I think I might have figured it out." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Waters' confident smile faltered just slightly. Something in Kennedy's calm demeanor suggested he wasn't as unprepared as she had assumed. For the first time, some of her supporters in the gallery looked uncertain, as if suddenly realizing the show might not follow the script they had anticipated. "I want to thank you for that colorful speech, Chairwoman Waters. You clearly care deeply about ethics in politics, so let's talk about ethics. I think we might find some common ground there." The audience shifted uneasily, sensing the calm confidence in Kennedy's voice. This was not the defensive posture they had expected. With a subtle nod to a staff member, Kennedy had the chamber's display screen switch from Waters' cartoon mockery to a series of financial figures and property records. The transition was jarring, from childish humor to serious documentation.
It's mighty interesting to see a public servant with a salary of $174,000 owning a home in Windsor Square valued at $4.8 million. Now, I'm just a simple country lawyer, but those numbers don't quite add up in my head. That's quite a mortgage for a congressional salary. The screen showed aerial photos of Waters' Los Angeles residence, along with property tax assessments and purchase records. Waters' face tightened as she realized the direction Kennedy was taking. This is completely inappropriate. My personal finances are not the subject of this hearing. You have no right to... Well, that's an interesting position, considering you just spent 20 minutes discussing my personal background, my accent, and my education. But if we're being sticklers for procedure, he pulled out a document with the committee letterhead. This hearing was called to discuss ethics in banking and government. Says so right here in the notice you signed, Madam Chairwoman. Item 3 on your own agenda, examination of potential...
Kennedy paused the video, letting the words hang in the air. Strong words from a congressional representative. Words that carry weight and consequence. Let's see some of what followed your call to action. He played a montage showing officials being harassed in restaurants, confronted at their homes, and their families being accosted at schools, all explicitly mentioning Waters' call to action as their inspiration. The footage was raw and disturbing. Shouting mobs surrounding diners, frightened children being hustled through crowds of protesters, property vandalized with threatening messages. The FBI reported a 73% increase in threats against government officials in the month following your speech, Kennedy stated, displaying an official FBI report with relevant sections highlighted. Would you like to see some of the people affected by this surge in confrontational behavior? Waters found her voice, though it lacked her earlier confidence. I never intended for anyone to be harmed. I was speaking about peaceful protest, about making our voices heard in a democracy. To suggest otherwise is a distortion of my words. Kennedy paused, then played another clip of Waters from a rally 1 week after her initial comments. I have no sympathy for these people that are in this administration. I meant exactly what I said. We must make them uncomfortable wherever they are. They should not be welcome anywhere. Peaceful? Kennedy asked quietly. Let's hear from some of those affected by your calls for confrontation. The screen showed a family with young children. The father, visibly emotional, spoke directly to the camera. We were having dinner when people surrounded our table, screaming at us, calling us Nazis and fascists. My 6-year-old daughter still has nightmares. They specifically mentioned Congresswoman Waters told them to do this, that they were following her instructions to make us unwelcome anywhere. The video shifted to a woman standing outside a vandalized home. They spray-painted threats on our garage door. My children couldn't go to school for a week because people were waiting outside to harass them, all because my husband works in the administration. Is this what democracy looks like to Representative Waters? Kennedy looked directly at Waters, his expression solemn. Internal emails from your office show your staff warned you about the consequences of your rhetoric, but were ignored. Your chief of staff wrote to you on April 24, 2018. We are receiving reports of escalating situations that reference your comments. Should we issue a clarifying statement emphasizing peaceful protest? He displayed the email exchange on screen. Waters' response read simply, "Good, that's the point. No clarification needed." The room fell silent as committee members and audience alike absorbed the implications of this exchange. Interesting contrast, Kennedy noted, displaying a split-screen comparison. On one side, videos of Waters condemning rhetoric from her opponents as dangerous and inciting violence. On the other, her own calls for confrontation and harassment. In one particularly damning juxtaposition, Waters was shown saying, "Words matter. Leaders must be careful not to encourage violence," followed immediately by her own statement, "We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make them uncomfortable wherever they are." Waters started to interrupt, her face flushed with anger, but Kennedy was prepared for this reaction. He calmly held up a printed document. "Chairwoman, you're violating your own Committee Rule 5C against interrupting during evidence presentation. I have the rules right here, signed by you last session. It states clearly, no member shall interrupt the presentation of evidence except on a formally recognized point of order. Since you haven't raised a point of order, I'm afraid I must continue." Several Democratic colleagues visibly winced at seeing Waters trapped by her own procedural rules once again. A few began quietly gathering their materials, preparing for a hasty exit when the opportunity presented itself. "Let me be clear," Kennedy continued, his tone measured but firm. "I believe in the First Amendment right to peaceful protest. I believe in holding government accountable. What I don't believe in is encouraging harassment of individuals and their families in private spaces, restaurants, homes, schools, places where everyone should feel safe, regardless of their political affiliation." He turned to a new page in his notes. "I'd like to read a letter received by my office last month. This is from a family who had to leave their home due to threats after you personally named and targeted them during a rally in Los Angeles." Kennedy read the letter, which described in painful detail the harassment, vandalism, and ultimately the family's decision to relocate for their children's safety. The letter writer, a mid-level government employee with no policy-making role, described losing their job, their home, and their sense of security, all because Waters had singled them out as a collaborator during a heated speech. The chamber was utterly silent as Kennedy finished reading. He looked up at Waters, whose expression had shifted from defiance to discomfort. "Perhaps most troubling of all," Kennedy said softly, "are the effects on the most vulnerable." He played an interview with a tearful 10-year-old boy. "Kids at school started bullying me after Ms. Waters said my dad was a bad person on TV. They call me Nazi and fascist, and I don't even know what those words mean. I just know they're bad. I don't understand why she hates us." The child's confusion and pain were evident. His small face crumpled with incomprehension at why he had become a target of hatred. "When we call to push back and make them unwelcome anywhere, these are the real people who get hurt. Not politicians with security details, not officials with protected homes, but children, families, regular people who simply happen to work for an administration you oppose." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle across the hearing room. Waters sat motionless, her once fiery demeanor completely extinguished. The attack she had launched so confidently at the beginning of the hearing now seemed like a distant memory, a miscalculation of epic proportions. "You know," Kennedy continued, his voice thoughtful, "my father used to tell me something important about power. He said with great power comes great responsibility. I think he borrowed that somewhere, but it's true nonetheless. The words we speak as elected officials carry weight beyond what we might intend. They can inspire or they can incite. They can heal or they can harm." He displayed a chart showing a correlation between inflammatory political rhetoric and reported incidents of political violence over the past decade. "This isn't a partisan issue," Kennedy emphasized. "Irresponsible rhetoric exists on both sides of the aisle. The difference is in how we respond when confronted with the consequences of our words." He pulled out another document, a compilation of statements from Waters defending her calls for confrontation even after violence had occurred. In each instance, she doubled down rather than acknowledging any responsibility for the consequences. "In leadership," Kennedy said, "true strength lies not in doubling down on mistakes, but in having the courage to acknowledge them and change course. That's something my grandfather taught me, and it served me well over the years." Waters, for the first time since the hearing, seemed genuinely affected, not by political calculation, but by genuine reflection. Her eyes remained fixed on the image of the tearful child still frozen on the screen. Kennedy gathered his notes, closing this section of his presentation with deliberate care. "I believe words matter, Chairwoman Waters. I believe leaders have a special responsibility to consider the impact of their words. And I believe that when we see the harm our words have caused, we have a moral obligation to acknowledge that harm and work to heal it." The room remained hushed. The atmosphere had transformed from a political confrontation to something more profound, a moment of genuine moral reckoning.
Perhaps, Kennedy suggested gently, we should move on to discuss another aspect of leadership, how we represent our country's interests on the global stage. I believe the public would find that equally illuminating. Waters nodded almost imperceptibly, still unable to meet his gaze or formulate a response. Her earlier attacks on Kennedy's character and intelligence now seemed not just miscalculated, but embarrassingly petty in the light of the serious ethical questions he had raised. Kennedy opened his next folder, labeled Foreign Interests, and prepared for the fourth round of his methodical dismantling of Maxine Waters' political facade. Kennedy's demeanor changed again as he opened the new folder. His voice took on a tone of patriotic conviction that commanded the hearing room's attention. "Public service comes with sacred obligations," he began, standing to address the committee. "Each of us in this room has taken an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We pledge to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. We swore to take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. We swore to take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. We swore to take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. And we promised to well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which we were about to enter. So help us God." The invocation of the oath resonated throughout the chamber. Several committee members unconsciously straightened in their seats, reminded of the solemn promise they had all made. "Chairwoman Waters," Kennedy continued, "would you agree that members of Congress should never allow foreign entities to influence their decisions or use their position to benefit foreign interests over American ones?" Waters nodded cautiously, clearly unsure where this was heading, but
Kennedy concluded with an unexpected offer. "Representative Waters, we may be political opponents, but we share the same responsibility to the American people. I'm not seeking to end your career. I'm hoping to remind all of us why we're here." He extended a symbolic olive branch. "Perhaps we could work together on these reforms. Show the American people that accountability transcends partisanship." Waters, caught completely off guard by this show of grace after such a thorough dismantling, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. As the hearing concluded, Kennedy gathered his papers without fanfare. "My grandmother had one more saying I'd like to share. Even the strongest storm eventually gives way to sunshine. I hope we can find some sunshine after this storm for the good of the people we serve." Chaos erupted as the hearing adjourned. The hallway outside the committee room became a frenzied marketplace of information, with reporters shoving microphones toward anyone who had witnessed the extraordinary confrontation. Cameras flashed continuously as committee members emerged, each instantly surrounded by press seeking comment on what many were already calling the most consequential congressional hearing in decades. Kennedy politely declined to comment as he made his way through the crowd, stating only, "The evidence speaks for itself. My interest is in reform, not retribution." Despite persistent questioning, he remained composed and refused to gloat or elaborate, maintaining the same dignified demeanor he had displayed throughout the hearing. "Senator Kennedy, do you think Representative Waters should resign?" shouted a reporter from CNN. Kennedy paused briefly. "That's not my decision to make. My concern is in improving the system, not punishing individuals." "But after all the evidence you presented," the reporter persisted, "everyone deserves the opportunity to correct their course, including Representative Waters, if she chooses to do so." With that, he continued walking, his staff creating a protective buffer as he made his way toward his office. Meanwhile, Waters remained in the committee room long after most had departed, consulting with her attorney and remaining staff members. When she finally emerged, she looked visibly aged, the confident firebrand of the morning replaced by a subdued, contemplative figure. She too declined to speak with reporters, hurrying to a waiting vehicle that quickly disappeared into the D.C. traffic. Within hours, the political landscape had shifted dramatically. Hashtag Kennedy wins and hashtag Bayou Justice dominated social media, with clips of the exchange being viewed millions of times. The video of Waters' opening attack, juxtaposed with Kennedy's methodical dismantling of her record, became the most shared political content of the year. News networks ran with headlines like "Kennedy flips the script" and "Waters meets her match in Louisiana Senator." What we witnessed today was political jiu-jitsu at its finest, observed a political analyst on MSNBC. Waters initiated what she thought would be a career-defining takedown of Kennedy, only to find herself completely outmaneuvered. Kennedy allowed her to overextend herself, then systematically dismantled her credibility with actual evidence rather than personal attacks. CNN's chief political correspondent noted, Kennedy essentially created a masterclass in how to respond to political character assassination. He never raised his voice, never resorted to personal insults, and never strayed from the facts. It was devastating precisely because it was so measured and evidence-based. By evening, several Democratic colleagues had issued carefully worded statements distancing themselves from Waters. The allegations raised today deserve serious investigation, said the House Majority Leader, notably absent any defense of Waters herself. Our party remains committed to ethical governance and transparency. Behind closed doors, Democratic leadership was reportedly furious, not just at the revelations, but at Waters' handling of the entire situation. She walked into a trap of her own making, a senior Democratic strategist told Politico. She turned what should have been a routine hearing into a personal vendetta and got absolutely demolished in the process. The damage to her personally and to the party more broadly is incalculable. Kennedy returned to Louisiana the following day, declining the national media circuit despite numerous lucrative offers. When cornered by a local reporter at the Baton Rouge airport, he shrugged off questions about his victory. "I didn't win anything," he said, adjusting his worn leather briefcase. "These aren't games. These are serious issues that deserve serious attention." When asked if he had planned a confrontation in advance, Kennedy smiled slightly. "Well, as the saying goes, chance favors the prepared mind. I believe in doing my homework."
Back in Washington, Waters canceled her scheduled appearances for the week, citing a need to review committee matters. Her once active social media accounts fell silent, with staffers quietly removing the clips of her opening attack on Kennedy that had aged so poorly in light of what followed. 1 week later, the House Ethics Committee formally announced an investigation into Waters' financial disclosures and potential conflicts of interest. The committee's statement emphasized that the investigation would be thorough, fair, and expeditious, though political observers noted the unusual speed with which the inquiry had been initiated, a reflection of the seriousness of the evidence Kennedy had presented. Several former allies publicly called for transparency, with one senior Democrat telling CNN, "If there's nothing to hide, then cooperation with the investigation should be complete and immediate. Our credibility as a party depends on holding ourselves to the same standards we demand of others." Kennedy continued his regular Senate work, refusing to comment further on the Waters situation, despite daily media inquiries. In a brief interview with Louisiana Public Broadcasting, he said simply, "I did what needed to be done. Now it's time to get back to serving the people of Louisiana." In her district, Waters faced a dramatically different reception than she was accustomed to. At a previously scheduled community meeting, several constituents directly confronted her with questions raised in Kennedy's presentation. The normally combative representative adopted an uncharacteristically conciliatory tone, promising to listen more and do better for her community. Waters maintained a low profile nationally, canceling several scheduled cable news appearances. Her office issued a statement calling the allegations politically motivated, but noticeably lacking specific denials of Kennedy's claims. Political analysts noted the statement's carefully crafted language, which addressed the political motivation rather than the substantive evidence. "She's in damage control mode," noted a veteran political consultant. The problem is, Kennedy presented such specific, documented evidence that traditional deflection tactics aren't working. She's facing the toughest challenge of her political career. 1 month later, in a move that shocked Washington, Waters announced she would cooperate with Kennedy's proposed reforms. "While I dispute many of the characterizations made during the hearing," her statement read, "I believe increasing transparency in government finances benefits everyone. This is an opportunity to strengthen public trust in our institutions." The announcement caused immediate speculation about what had prompted this unexpected cooperation. Some suggested it was a calculated move to rehabilitate her image, while others wondered if additional evidence might be forthcoming that would make opposition untenable. Even more surprising was the news of a private meeting between Waters and Kennedy at a neutral Capitol Hill location. No staff were present, and neither party commented publicly on what was discussed. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours, according to those who observed Waters arriving and departing. Sources close to Waters indicated she had acknowledged some missteps, though not the full extent of Kennedy's allegations. One aide, speaking anonymously, described her as reflective following the meeting, saying she had been genuinely affected by the testimony from constituents in her district. Kennedy, true to form, refused to divulge details of their conversation, telling a persistent reporter only that constructive dialogue is always preferable to public confrontation. "Representative Waters and I had a productive discussion about moving forward in a way that benefits the American people." The meeting sparked rumors of an unlikely alliance forming between the conservative Louisiana senator and the progressive California representative, an odd couple brought together by a shared interest in ethics reform, albeit through very different paths. 3 months later, the Kennedy-Waters Financial Transparency Act was introduced with bipartisan co-sponsors, surprising even seasoned political observers who had expected Waters to fade into obscurity following the hearing. The legislation proposed stringent new disclosure requirements for all members of Congress, with particular focus on family business connections and foreign influences. "This is not a partisan issue," Kennedy said at the press conference announcing the bill. "Americans deserve to know that their elected representatives are working for them, not for foreign interests or personal enrichment." Waters stood alongside Kennedy at the announcement, a visual that would have seemed impossible 3 months earlier. "Transparency and accountability strengthen our democracy," she stated, reading carefully from prepared remarks. "While Senator Kennedy and I disagree on many policy issues, we agree that public service must be just that, service to the public." While skeptics saw the partnership as political theater designed to salvage Waters' reputation, others recognized it as a rare example of constructive engagement across the partisan divide. Waters began appearing more frequently in her district, hosting town halls and meeting with community leaders. Local residents reported mixed feelings, appreciation for the renewed attention, coupled with skepticism about its durability. "She's definitely more present than before," said a community activist in Englewood. "But we've seen promises before. The question is whether this change will last beyond the current scrutiny." Kennedy consistently deflected credit for the legislation, insisting the system is correcting itself. When pressed about his confrontation with Waters, he would only say, "That's water under the bridge. We're looking forward now, not backward." Political analysts noted the remarkable transformation in both politicians' public personas. Waters more constituency-focused and less combative, and Kennedy more policy-oriented and less reliant on his folksy persona. "What we're seeing is 2 seasoned politicians adapting to a changed landscape," observed a political science professor at Georgetown. "Waters is rebuilding her image through substantive work rather than rhetorical battles, while Kennedy is leveraging his newfound national prominence to advance policy priorities rather than personal ambition."
1 year later, the Kennedy-Waters Act passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, a rarity in the polarized political environment. The bill was hailed as the most significant ethics reform in a generation, establishing new standards for financial disclosure, foreign contact reporting, and constituent service metrics. At the signing ceremony, Kennedy and Waters stood on opposite sides of the president but exchanged a brief, respectful nod. Observers noted that while certainly not friends, they had developed a working relationship based on mutual respect, something few would have predicted after their explosive confrontation. This legislation proves that adversity can sometimes produce unexpected collaboration, the president remarked at the signing ceremony. Senator Kennedy and Representative Waters have shown that accountability and reform can transcend partisan differences.